It was a dark and stormy Halloween night in Pasadena, Texas in 1974. The wind howled through the barren trees, their branches clawing at the moonlit sky like bony fingers reaching out from a grave. The streets were filled with the laughter of children, their faces obscured by masks and costumes as they scurried from house to house, collecting candy in their pumpkin-shaped buckets. Among these children was 8-year-old Timothy O'Brien, his eyes wide with excitement as he clutched his father's hand. Ronald O'Brien, a man with a broad smile that didn't quite reach his eyes, led his son and daughter from one house to the next, occasionally glancing over his shoulder as if he expected someone, or something, to be following them. Timothy's favorite treat was candy, and he had been looking forward to this night for weeks. He could hardly contain his joy when, after knocking on the door of a large, decrepit house at the end of the street, he was handed a Pixie Stix, the bright packaging gleaming in the dim light. As the family made their way back home, the night's events began to take on an eerie, unsettling tone. The wind seemed to whisper in their ears, carrying with it a chill that seeped into their bones. The streets, once filled with laughter, now felt deserted, as if the night itself was holding its breath, waiting for something terrible to happen. Once inside, Timothy wasted no time tearing into his haul of sweets. His father watched him closely as he unwrapped the Pixie Stix, his expression unreadable in the dim glow of the kitchen light. The candy powder spilled into Timothy's mouth, its sweetness dissolving on his tongue. But something was wrong. Timothy's face twisted in pain, his small body convulsing as he fell to the floor, clutching his stomach. Panic gripped the room as his mother screamed, and his father frantically called for an ambulance. The house, once filled with the warmth of family, was now shrouded in a suffocating darkness, the air thick with the scent of fear. The ambulance arrived too late. Timothy's tiny body was lifeless, his skin pale and clammy. The once innocent Pixie Stix had become a harbinger of death, laced with a lethal dose of cyanide. The sweet treat, which should have been a source of joy, had instead delivered him into the arms of death. As the investigation unfolded, the horrifying truth began to emerge, like a festering wound exposed to the light. The police, following a trail of deceit and betrayal, discovered that it was Ronald O'Brien, Timothy's own father, who had poisoned the candy. He had taken out a life insurance policy on his children just days before Halloween, planning to murder them for the payout. His sinister plan extended beyond his own son. He had handed out poisoned candy to 3 other children, hoping to cover his tracks and make it appear as though a random madman was responsible. But fate, it seemed, had other plans. The other children never ate the candy, their lives spared by some twist of fortune. Ronald O'Brien, now known as the Candyman, was arrested and brought to trial. His cold, calculated actions shocked the community to its core. The courtroom was filled with an almost tangible sense of dread as the jury listened to the details of his twisted plot, their faces ashen with horror. In 1984, 10 years after that fateful Halloween night, Ronald O'Brien was executed for his crimes. The execution chamber was eerily silent as the lethal injection was administered, the only sound being the faint hum of the machinery. As his life slipped away, one could almost feel the presence of those he had wronged, their silent vigil a testament to the horror he had wrought. Even now, decades later, the story of the Candyman lingers like a shadow over the town of Pasadena, Texas. On Halloween night, when the wind howls and the moon casts an eerie glow over the houses, parents hold their children a little closer, and the legend of the poisoned Pixie Stix is whispered among them. For it is a reminder, a chilling, blood-curdling reminder, that sometimes the real monsters aren't the ones hiding under the bed or lurking in the darkened corners of our nightmares. Sometimes they are the ones who sit beside us, wearing the familiar faces of those we trust. The wind howled through the towering trees as the moon cast an eerie glow over the isolated cabin in the woods. It was Halloween night, and a group of close-knit friends had gathered in this remote spot in Livonia, Michigan, seeking a night of fun and fright. They were ready for costumes, candy, and tales of terror, but none of them knew that the night would bring them face to face with something far darker than they had ever imagined. The cabin stood alone, miles from the nearest town, its wooden walls creaking with age and history. Inside, the fire crackled, casting flickering shadows that danced ominously on the walls. The group, dressed in their finest Halloween costumes, laughed and chatted, the excitement of the holiday electrifying the air. But as the night deepened and the embers in the fireplace began to dim, someone suggested a game to raise the stakes of their evening. The Ouija board. The old board, dusty and worn, was pulled from a forgotten corner of the cabin. It was a relic, handed down through generations, each telling tales of strange occurrences and unexplainable events. The group, half joking, half nervous, gathered around the table, their hands resting lightly on the planchette. They asked the usual questions at first, giggling as they tried to spook each other with tales of the supernatural. "Is anyone there?" they asked, their voices barely above a whisper. At first there was nothing, only the sound of the wind rattling the windows and the distant call of an owl. But then, the planchette moved. Slowly, deliberately, it slid across the board, spelling out a single word. Yes. The laughter died in their throats as they exchanged uneasy glances, trying to figure out who was behind the prank. But the tension in the room grew, thickening the air as they continued to ask questions. "Who are you?" one of them ventured, her voice trembling. The planchette moved again, more quickly this time, spelling out a name none of them recognized. Azazel, it spelled. A chill ran down their spines, the name foreign and unsettling, as if they had touched something they shouldn't have. The questions grew more frantic, their curiosity now tinged with fear. "What do you want?" someone asked, and the answer came almost instantly. "You." The fire in the hearth sputtered, casting the room into brief darkness before flaring up again. But this time, the flames seemed to dance with a malevolent life of their own. The friends could feel a presence in the room, something cold and watching, unseen but undeniable. Then came the scratching. At first it was faint, almost inaudible, like nails lightly brushing against wood. But it grew louder, more insistent, coming from the walls, the floor, even the ceiling. It was as if something was clawing its way out, trying to break free. Panic set in, and they decided to end the game, to shut the board and move on. But as they lifted their hands from the planchette, it shot across the board, moving so violently that it flew off the table, hitting the wall with a thud. The cabin seemed to breathe around them, the shadows lengthening, darkening, closing in. Suddenly the lights flickered and the temperature in the room plummeted. Their breaths came out in misty puffs as they huddled together, fear gripping their hearts. The scratching stopped, replaced by a new sound, whispers. Faint, unintelligible at first, but growing louder, more coherent. The words seemed to come from all around them, a chorus of voices chanting in an ancient, forgotten language. And then they saw it. A figure, barely visible in the corner of the room, standing just beyond the reach of the flickering firelight. It was tall, its form shrouded in shadow, but its eyes were like burning coals, glowing with an unnatural fire. The whispers grew into a crescendo, filling the cabin with a deafening roar as the figure stepped forward, its presence suffocating, malevolent. The friends scrambled for the door, their terror overriding all reason. But the door wouldn't budge, as if held shut by some unseen force. Desperation clawed at them as they pounded on the walls trying to find a way out. The figure drew closer, its movements slow, deliberate, savoring their fear. Finally, with a burst of adrenaline, they managed to break a window, and one by one they clambered out into the cold, dark night. They ran through the woods, not daring to look back, the whispers still echoing in their minds. When they finally reached their cars and sped away, the cabin was swallowed by the darkness, disappearing from view. But the horror did not end there. The group never spoke of that night again, but each of them was haunted by it. They saw things in the shadows, heard whispers in the silence, and felt an ever-present coldness that seeped into their bones. Some of them moved away, trying to escape whatever had followed them, but it was always there, lurking, waiting. Years later, one of the friends returned to the spot where the cabin had stood, only to find nothing but an empty clearing. The cabin was gone, as if it had never existed. But as they turned to leave, they saw something that made their blood run cold. The Ouija board, half buried in the dirt, its planchette pointing to a single word: goodbye. From that night on, they knew the game was not over. It had only just begun. Gather round, everyone. The night is dark, the air is cold, and I have a tale that will chill you to the bone. A story of a house that should not exist, yet it waits, lurking in the shadows, hungry for the unsuspecting. It was the Halloween of 1998, when a group of college students eager for a thrill decided to test the bounds of fear itself. They had heard whispers of an old haunted house deep in the Pennsylvania woods, a house that was said to appear only on Halloween night. The locals warned them, telling tales of a terrible tragedy that had befallen the house decades earlier. A family had been brutally murdered within its walls, and soon after, the house had burned to the ground. But, the legend said, every Halloween, the house would reappear, restored to its former glory, as if it had never been touched by fire or time. And those who dared to enter it, well, they were never seen again. But these students, young and bold, scoffed at such superstitions. They were out for an adventure, not to be cowed by ghost stories. So, they packed their flashlights, bundled up against the cold, and set out into the night, their laughter echoing through the dark woods. For hours they wandered, their excitement slowly giving way to frustration as they stumbled over roots and brambles, their flashlights flickering in the dark. Just as they were about to give up, one of them spotted something through the trees, an old mansion, its silhouette looming against the night sky. It stood there, impossibly pristine, as though untouched by time. The windows were intact, the paint unchipped. It was as though the house had simply stepped out of the past. Excited now, the group approached, their doubts melting away. The door, heavy and wooden, creaked open with a slow, ominous groan, as if it had been waiting for them. They stepped inside into a world frozen in time. The furniture was covered in a fine layer of dust, yet nothing was out of place. An old clock on the wall ticked softly, though no one had wound it in years. The air was thick with the scent of decay and something else, something metallic. The temperature inside the house was far colder than it had been outside, the kind of cold that seeps into your bones and whispers of death. The students felt it immediately, a sense of wrongness, of something watching them from the shadows. But they pushed on, nervous laughter and bravado masking their growing unease. They split up, exploring the house room by room. Each step they took echoed loudly, disturbing the heavy silence that blanketed the place. As they moved deeper into the house, strange things began to happen. One of them swore they saw a shadow dart past in the corner of their eye. But when they turned, nothing was there. Another heard faint whispers, like the voices of 100 souls trapped just beyond the veil of reality. The walls seemed to close in around them, the hallways stretching and twisting, leading them in circles. Suddenly, a door slammed shut behind them with a thunderous bang, the sound reverberating through the house like the final toll of a death knell. The students froze, their breath caught in their throats. They were no longer sure where the exit was. The house had shifted, its layout warping and twisting like a living thing, intent on keeping them trapped. Panic set in. They tried to retrace their steps, but the house wouldn't let them. The doors they had passed through moments before were gone, replaced by blank walls. The windows were sealed shut, offering no view of the outside world. It was as if the house had swallowed them whole, pulling them deeper into its dark belly. Desperation clawed at their minds. They shouted for each other, but their voices were swallowed by the oppressive silence. The whispers grew louder, more insistent, filling their heads with thoughts not their own. They could feel something pressing in on them, unseen and malevolent. In a final act of desperation, one of them hurled a chair through a window. The glass shattered, and for a brief, blessed moment, they could see the night outside, feel the cold air on their skin. They scrambled through the broken window, cutting themselves on the shards, not caring as long as they could escape. When they finally emerged into the night, panting and terrified, they turned back to look at the house. But there was nothing there. The mansion had vanished, leaving behind only the dark, empty woods. The place where it had stood was now a patch of bare earth, cold and unyielding under the moonlight. Shaken to their core, the students stumbled back to town, their adventure turned nightmare. They told their story, but few believed them. After all, the house they described had burned down decades ago. No trace of it remained, no records, no ruins, nothing except the legend, passed down through generations. Those who dared to seek it out, to challenge the veil between this world and the next, never returned. And so the house remains a mystery, a curse, waiting in the darkness for the next unsuspecting souls to cross its threshold. They say it appears only on Halloween, when the boundary between the living and the dead is at its thinnest. So if you find yourself lost in the woods on a cold October night and you stumble across a house that shouldn't be there, be warned. Not all who enter will find their way back.